Hey everybody, Tarun here for Lead, Communicate, Grow, and in this episode we're going to look at the 5 ways that you can establish culture in your organization and why it is so important for you to learn how to do this as a leader. Come on, let's get into it. Okay, here it is, 5 ways that you can establish culture in your organization or team and why it is so important for you to know how to do this. Before I get into it, don't forget to subscribe or follow in whichever channel that you are tuning in on, and make sure you like and share with somebody that you think would benefit from our content. We're putting it out every week and we don't want you to miss a single episode. All right, first of all, let's start with the why. Why is it important to know how to establish culture in your organization or team? And I want to direct you for a more in-depth analysis of this is to an interview I did last week with my brother Sanjay Stevenson, who's somewhat of a bit of an expert on establishing culture in a leadership context. So I'm going to put the link in the description below. So make sure you click on that and check out the full conversation I have with Sanjay on establishing culture. But just to give you a snapshot, one of the reasons why you need to know how to establish culture in your organization is because culture is what drives the way that you do what you do. All right, whether it's your team or whether it's the organization as a whole, the way that you do it is what others are going to experience, whether they're your customers, whether your clients, whether your volunteers, whoever is participating in what you do, they are going to feel your culture long before they buy into your vision or start participating actively. And so the way in which you do stuff is going to portray the heart of your organization. It's going to portray, I guess, what's important to you and your organization. And most people will evaluate your organization and your leadership based on what they first initially feel about your organization, in the sense of how they interact with you and how you execute whatever job or whatever function that you do within your team and organization. So it's really important that you know how to establish culture. Now, every organization has a culture. Every team has a culture, whether you're proactive about it or not. Culture can just creep in if you're not intentional about it. So you can establish a really negative culture, or you can establish toxic culture. You can establish culture that is counterintuitive and counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve if you're not intentional about it. So if it's going to be the thing that people feel and experience about your leadership first, you want to be on top of it. You want to be ahead of it, not just let it happen by accident, because if you're not intentional, it's going to happen without your knowledge, and it could be detrimental to your leadership in the long run. So that's a little bit of an overview of why you need to establish culture. So how do you do it? The first thing you need to do to establish culture is identify your values. Your values are your not negotiables. Your values are the things that are most important to you as a leader and for your organization. If you like, the values are your compass heading. We do it a certain way, and this is the way we do it. Now, there might be different ways of doing it, but because of our value system, we want to value people very highly. And so we do it in a certain way based on what we think is most important to getting the job done. So you need to identify your values, and your values are really found in 2 ways. They are the things that you are most passionate about. When you think about your leadership, when you think about your organization, and you say things like, I really want to be leading a team or leading an organization that looks this way or feels this way. The things you are really passionate about will indicate to you what you prize highly over everything else. And so that can be one way of identifying your values. The other way you can identify your values is by seeing what frustrates you. When you look at your team, the way things function, when you look at your leadership, are there things that bother you? And you say, I hate the way we do that, or I hate the way that looks, or I can't stand when we do this or our team does this. If you're really passionately opposed to a particular way of doing things, that also helps you identify what your values are or what's important to you. And so you need to flip that and say, okay, if I hate it that way, what would it look like if it was done the right way? Or what would it look like if it was done the way that I really value highly? And that's how you start to shift your idea of what's important and what's not. If there's stuff that maybe slides, you can say that you have place high importance on values, but if it's not stuff that's really comes out in the way that you lead and it's not coming out in the way that you operate, then you might find that it's not actually a value, because it has to be a real internal passion for you to be a value. So that's the first thing. You need to identify your values. The second thing is you as a leader need to live out your values. If you can't operate with the level of integrity and with the level of adherence to your value system that you as a leader prescribe for everybody else, then nobody else will follow it. Culture will not stick if the leader doesn't place high importance on culture. If you are a leader that values punctuality with your team, but you always turn up to meetings late, then your culture will not stick, because first and foremost, you have to be able to model values. When you live it, it shows the importance of it, and your team and your organization are more likely to follow it. So that's really important. That's number two. You need to learn how to live your values. And if you're not living your values, then you can't expect your team to do so. The third thing is this: you need to teach your values. You need to explicitly explain to your team and your organization your values, why they're important, and what it looks like when everybody is hitting those benchmarks of value, if you like, culture. So when people are operating the way that you want them to operate, the way that you envisage them operating, they will know what it looks like, because you very clearly taught them this is what it will look like, this is what it will feel like when we are executing our values in this way. So you have to explicitly teach. Don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to accident and hope that people will just catch on. Not everybody shares your values, and if you want them to share it, you've got to first model it and then teach it. Okay, and the fourth thing is this: you need to enforce your values. How do you enforce your values? Well, it's simply this: if you've taken the time to model your values and teach your values, then the third aspect of that is you've got to be willing to correct team members and correct members of your organization if they do not adhere to your values. You've got to be prepared to have difficult conversations. You've got to be able to say, hey, we don't do it like that in this organization. That doesn't fit with our value system. And you need to have those conversations where you talk through the lack of adherence to your values, because that will set people against your culture, or it will start to weaken the culture in your organization. So make sure you're willing to enforce values, because if they're important to you, if you want to set culture, you have to enforce it. You have to follow through. You have to be prepared to have difficult conversations. If you've had a couple of friendly chats with your team and they're still adamant that they don't want to adhere to the way that you want them to do things, or that they're not abiding by the culture that's important to you, then you need to be able to have those difficult conversations about whether the position is a good fit for them. Don't shy away from difficult conversations or confronting people on whether their values are consistent with what your organization and leadership values are, because if you avoid them, those people will poison the rest of your team. I think it's Gary Vaynerchuk that says this: if you've got a top performing team member who doesn't adhere to your culture or your values, get rid of them immediately. It doesn't matter how much money they make for you. It doesn't matter how well they perform. If they're not willing to play ball as a team, they will end up poisoning your whole team, and you won't just lose one high performing team member, you'll lose 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because you never address the lack of adherence to values and culture. So it's really important that you enforce that. And the fifth one and the last one is this: always watch out for drift in your culture. Be willing to recalibrate your team and recalibrate your organization and reflect on how those values are working for you. Sometimes your values need to be tweaked. Sometimes your culture needs to tweak, because as human beings, we start to drift away from our initial compass headings. You know, it's a little bit like when you're piloting a plane or even a boat. You take a compass heading, but then you always have to keep correcting back to that compass heading, because other forces will push the vessel away from its compass heading. And it's the same with culture. There will be forces within your organization that are always looking to push culture to one side, or to maybe not intentionally, but it will drift, especially if you're growing as an organization. Sometimes your values don't scale with you or grow with you. And so you need to keep on readjusting or reevaluating your culture and your values to ensure that you are staying on the direction that you want. And if you're starting to drift, you need to pull the organization and your team back to their focus. So it's really important that you remember that people are going to feel your culture long before they buy into you as a leader, long before they buy into your vision or start participating with you. So if you can create an environment where people feel what you're passionate about and they understand the things that you are not passionate about and you want to avoid, then you will find that they actually are more inclined to buy into what you want them to do, and they're going to execute it in a way that's going to help you achieve all the goals that you have for your leadership. So I hope that was really helpful. Make sure you check out the interview with Sanjay Stevenson, and I'll post the link below. He goes right in depth on culture and establishing culture and building teams. It's a really insightful interview. So until next time, I'll catch you soon. Don't forget to like and share. Give us a comment if you liked our content. Make sure that you tell us any topics that you want us to cover off, if there's something really important that you want us to talk about, and we'd love to hear from you. And if you're listening on our podcast, we'd love if you can give us a review. Give us a review on the iTunes podcast platform, or if you're on Stitcher or one of the other platforms, just give us a review. That'll help the algorithm to recognize us and push us up in our rankings. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you leave a comment and a like, and that'll help to push our videos up in ranking and help other people get this content as well. All right, until next time, I'm Tarun Stevenson for Lead, Communicate, Grow. Stay safe.